Welcome back to another episode of Cluster Fudge, the show where we unpack the most overwhelming, under-discussed, and misunderstood crises shaping our world, with a little clarity and a lot of real talk. I'm your host, Alexandra. Now, I know the title of today's episode probably made you do a double take. We have a population problem, yeah. I said it. But before you hit pause or jump into the comments yelling Malthusian fear-mongering, or are you seriously saying humans are the issue? Stop. Take a breath. Let's talk. Because here's the truth. We've crossed 8 billion people on this planet. And while that's an incredible milestone in terms of human resilience and technology, it's also triggered some uncomfortable but necessary questions. Can our planet actually support this many people? Are we pushing past Earth's limits or just mismanaging our resources? Is it overpopulation or overconsumption? And most importantly, what do we even mean by a population problem? I get it. The idea of blaming too many people sounds dystopian, even offensive. But that's not what this episode is about. It's not about shaming birth rates or pointing fingers at any country, race, or culture. It's about understanding scale, sustainability, and the systems that got us here, and figuring out where we go next before the whole thing collapses under its own weight. This isn't doom and gloom for the sake of drama, although let's be real, the numbers are scary. This is about climate justice, inequality, human rights, and yes, personal responsibility too. So whether you're someone who thinks we're headed towards societal collapse, or you're one of those folks who says we could fit the entire world in Texas, stay tuned, because we're breaking down the facts, the fears, and the future of population growth. Let's get into it. As of this recording, there are over 8.1 billion people on Earth. Let that sink in for a second. That's more people alive today than have ever been alive at any one point in human history. To give it some perspective, we hit 1 billion people globally around the early 1800s. It took us all of human history to get to 1 billion and just about 200 years to multiply that by 8. Now, population growth isn't evenly distributed. While some countries are experiencing what's called demographic explosion, others are facing the opposite, population decline. So let's break this down, where the growth is happening. Most of the population growth is coming from low and middle income countries, particularly in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Countries like Nigeria, India, Pakistan, and Ethiopia are projected to see significant population increases in the next few decades. For example, Nigeria's population is expected to double by 2050, potentially surpassing the US as the third most populous country. India recently overtook China as the world's most populous nation. Meanwhile, countries like Japan, Italy, and South Korea are seeing rapidly declining birth rates and aging populations, leading to labor shortages and economic stagnation. This isn't just about babies being born, it's also about longevity. Thanks to advancements in medicine, sanitation, and technology, people are living longer than ever, which more people alive for longer periods of time, consuming more resources. Ecological footprint versus population size. Here's where it gets tricky. The countries with the fastest growing populations are often not the ones consuming the most resources. In fact, high-income countries with stable or even shrinking populations still account for the majority of global emissions, food waste, and resource extraction. For example, the average American uses over 30 times more energy than the average person in Bangladesh. Just 10% of the global population is responsible for nearly 50% of carbon emissions. So if we're talking about environmental impact, it's not just how many people there are, it's how much each of us is using. Are we over the limit? Let's introduce a term here, carrying capacity. That's the maximum population size an environment can sustain indefinitely, given the food, habitat, water, and other necessities available. Experts argue over what Earth's carrying capacity actually is. Estimates range from 4 billion to 16 billion, depending on how we live. If everyone lived like the average American, Earth's carrying capacity might be 2 billion. But if we lived like the average Rwandan, the planet could support over 10 billion. So it's not just about population, it's about lifestyle, consumption, and access. The urbanization crunch. More than 56% of the world's population now lives in cities, and that's expected to rise to 70% by 2050. This puts a strain on housing, water systems, sanitation, transportation, and food supply chains. Many megacities like Mumbai, Lagos, Manila, and Sao Paulo are already struggling with overcrowding, pollution, and infrastructure collapse. And yet they keep growing. More people plus more density equals more potential for crises if planning doesn't catch up. Final thought for this segment. So what do the numbers tell us? They tell us that we're facing a complex, layered issue that's not just about headcount. It's about equity, economics, consumption, and sustainability. And the hardest part, we're adding over 200,000 people to the planet every single day. We are quite literally growing past our system's ability to adapt unless we rethink the way we live, govern, and plan. So when we say we have a population problem, the problem isn't people existing. The problem is the system that hasn't evolved with the scale. Next up, we're diving into why this problem didn't come out of nowhere. Spoiler alert, colonialism and capitalism are about to enter the chat. Stay with me. Let's dig deeper into what all this means for the planet itself. Because here's the harsh reality. Our growing population is placing massive strain on Earth's finite resources, and the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Finite planet, infinite demands, the Earth is a closed system. We only have so much fresh water, arable land, forests, and minerals. And with more people consuming, that pressure is intensifying. For example, according to the United Nations, by 2030, the world will face a 40% shortfall in freshwater if current consumption trends continue. Deforestation rates are alarmingly high, with about 10 million hectares of forest lost annually. That's an area roughly the size of Iceland gone each year, often to make way for agriculture or urban development. Soil degradation affects about 33% of the planet's land surface, reducing our ability to grow food sustainably. And as populations expand, so does demand for energy, food, and water, pushing ecosystems beyond their tipping points. Climate change, amplifying the crisis. Climate change and population growth are deeply intertwined. More people means increased greenhouse gas emissions from energy use, transportation, and industry. Greater need for agriculture, often leading to deforestation and methane emissions from livestock. More waste production, including plastic and toxic pollutants. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, warns that if we don't curb emissions, we risk reaching irreversible climate tipping points, like melting ice caps, extreme weather, and biodiversity loss. It's a vicious cycle. Population growth drives environmental degradation, which in turn threatens the very resources people depend on. Water wars and food security. Water scarcity is not just a future problem, it's happening now. Over 2 billion people live in countries experiencing high water stress. The agriculture sector accounts for roughly 70% of global freshwater use, and as demand for food rises with population growth, this number only increases. Fish stocks are being depleted rapidly, threatening protein sources for millions. Food insecurity is rising, especially in vulnerable regions. Land degradation, droughts, and conflicts fueled by resource scarcity create a dangerous feedback loop. Urban overload and waste. Let's zoom into cities for a moment. Rapid urbanization without adequate infrastructure leads to overflowing landfills and toxic waste dumps. Air pollution, which the WHO estimates causes 7 million premature deaths annually worldwide. Overburdened transportation and energy systems, leading to frequent blackouts, congestion, and health crises. Many urban areas are struggling to provide clean water, sanitation, and adequate housing for their exploding populations. Loss of biodiversity. Human activity is driving the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history. Species are disappearing at rates estimated to be 1,000 times faster than natural background rates. Why does this matter? Because biodiversity underpins ecosystem health, which provides us with pollination for crops, clean air and water, climate regulation, medicine and genetic resources. When ecosystems collapse, human societies do too. The balancing act. We face a critical question. How do we meet human needs without destroying the planet? It requires sustainable consumption, investment in renewable energy and green infrastructure, equitable distribution of resources, smart urban planning. The challenge is immense, but not impossible. To sum it up, the population problem is about more than just numbers. It's about how those numbers translate into resource demands and environmental pressures. And if we don't act soon, the cascading effects of environmental collapse could upend societies worldwide. Next, we'll look at how history shaped this predicament, including the uncomfortable truths about colonialism and resource extraction. Let's zoom in on one of the most visible and immediate impacts of population growth: the urban explosion and what it means for housing and infrastructure. Urban growth, a double-edged sword. Cities are magnets. They promise opportunity, jobs, education, and better healthcare. As a result, over half of the world's population, about 4.5 billion people, now live in urban areas, and this number is projected to rise to nearly 7 billion by 2050. That's huge. But with that growth comes massive challenges: housing crisis, shelter shortage, and slums. The rapid influx of people into cities has created a housing crisis that many places are struggling to manage. According to the UN Habitat, about 1 billion people worldwide live in slums or informal settlements, often lacking clean water, sanitation, and secure tenure. In many megacities, the cost of decent housing has skyrocketed beyond the reach of millions. People are forced to settle in overcrowded, unsafe conditions, sometimes in flood-prone or polluted areas. This leads to health problems, from respiratory illnesses caused by poor ventilation to increased vulnerability to diseases like cholera due to inadequate sanitation. And this isn't just a problem in developing countries. Even wealthy nations face housing shortages and homelessness, highlighting the scale and complexity of the issue. Infrastructure overload and decay. Housing is just one piece of the puzzle. Infrastructure, roads, public transport, electricity, water supply, sewage, and healthcare facilities, is often decades behind population growth. Cities struggle to keep pace with the increased demand for electricity and clean water. Blackouts and water shortages become common, disrupting daily life and business. Public transport systems, already stretched, become overcrowded and inefficient, forcing many into private cars, which worsens traffic congestion and pollution. Waste management systems buckle under the volume of garbage generated, leading to pollution, blocked waterways, and health hazards. Healthcare facilities, schools, and emergency services are overwhelmed, reducing the quality and accessibility of essential services. In short, infrastructure breakdown isn't just inconvenient, it threatens public health and economic stability. Urban sprawl and environmental costs. To accommodate growing populations, cities often expand outwards in a phenomenon called urban sprawl. This eats into agricultural land and natural habitats, further reducing green spaces that are crucial for biodiversity, flood control, and climate regulation. Urban sprawl increases reliance on cars, leading to higher emissions and air pollution. It also drives up the cost of providing infrastructure, since services must be extended over larger areas. Examples and case studies. Let's look at some real-world examples. Mumbai, India, faces extreme housing shortages, with millions living in informal settlements near industrial areas or flood zones. Infrastructure struggles lead to frequent water shortages and power cuts. Los Angeles, USA, characterized by sprawling suburbs and notorious traffic congestion, LA grapples with high housing costs and limited affordable options. Lagos, one of the fastest growing cities in the world, it's facing enormous pressure on housing and public services, with many residents living without formal housing or reliable utilities. The social and economic impact. The breakdown of housing infrastructure doesn't just affect individuals, it undermines entire communities and economies. Overcrowding can increase crime and social unrest. Poor housing and sanitation contribute to disease outbreaks like cholera or COVID-19. Lack of reliable electricity and transport can stifle business growth and employment opportunities. In many places, this fuels a vicious cycle where poverty and inadequate services reinforce each other. What needs to change? Addressing urban sprawl and infrastructure breakdown requires smart urban planning, prioritizing density, mixed-use developments, and green spaces, investment in affordable housing, governments and private sectors working together to build safe, affordable homes. Upgrading infrastructure, modernizing water, electricity, transport, and waste systems to meet current and future demands. Community participation, ensuring local voices are heard in planning and development to create livable, resilient cities. In the end, how we manage our cities will define how well we live on this planet. It's a massive challenge, but also an incredible opportunity to build sustainable, inclusive urban futures. All right, now we're stepping into a highly sensitive and complex part of the population conversation, the ethical questions around reproduction. When population growth strains our planet, infrastructure, and resources, some start asking the tough and sometimes controversial question, who gets to have kids? This is a topic loaded with history, culture, and deep moral questions, and it's one we have to approach with care and nuance. Why this question even comes up? As global population growth has accelerated, especially in certain regions, governments, policymakers, and activists have debated whether there should be limits or incentives around family size. The motivation often comes from concerns about overpopulation and environmental sustainability, the strain on social services, healthcare, and education systems, economic worries about supporting a growing dependent population. But this question quickly becomes entangled with rights, freedoms, and justice. A troubled history, coercion, and eugenics. Historically, attempts to control population and reproduction have often targeted marginalized groups, leading to gross violations of human rights. In the 20th century, several countries implemented forced sterilizations and eugenics programs aimed at people deemed undesirable based on race, disability, or poverty. China's one-child policy, 1979 to 2015, is perhaps the most well-known modern example, leading to forced abortions, sterilizations, and significant demographic imbalances. In the US, Native American, Black, and disabled women were disproportionately sterilized without consent well into the late 20th century. These dark chapters remind us that reproductive control has too often been wielded as a tool of oppression. Reproductive rights versus population control. At the heart of the debate is the tension between individual reproductive rights and collective environmental and social responsibility. Reproductive rights advocates emphasize that decisions about having children are deeply personal and fundamental to human freedom and dignity. On the other hand, some environmental and demographic experts argue that family size has a massive impact on climate change, resource use, and social welfare, and so population policies may be necessary. Balancing these perspectives is extremely challenging. Global inequalities in reproduction. The question, who gets to have kids, is often framed differently depending on geography and socioeconomic status. In many high-income countries, fertility rates are below replacement level, around 2.1 children per woman, and governments worry about aging populations and shrinking workforces. Here, the debate is more about encouraging births. Conversely, in some low-income countries, high fertility rates contribute to rapid population growth, but calls for limiting births often clash with cultural values and socio-economic realities, such as lack of access to contraception or education. This creates a tension where some populations are encouraged to have fewer children, while others are encouraged to have more, raising concerns about fairness and equity. The role of education and empowerment. One of the most effective ethical ways to address population growth is through education and empowerment, especially of women and girls. Access to comprehensive sex education and family planning services allows people to make informed decisions about reproduction. Empowering women economically and socially often correlates with lower fertility rates as women gain control over their reproductive lives. Countries with voluntary family planning programs tend to see sustainable, gradual declines in birth rates without coercion. Ethical family planning, what does it look like? Ethical approaches focus on voluntary access to contraceptives and reproductive health care, respecting cultural values while providing information and options, supporting individuals and families in making choices that are right for them rather than imposing top-down limits, addressing poverty and inequality, which are often root causes of high fertility rates. What about the future? As technology advances, some propose more radical interventions. Genetic counseling and reproductive technologies could influence future family planning decisions. Ethical debates about population engineering or incentives for smaller families will likely intensify. It's crucial that any future policies prioritize human rights, informed consent, and social justice. So who gets to have kids? The short answer, Everyone should have the right to decide for themselves. But society also has a responsibility to provide the education, resources, and conditions that allow those decisions to be informed and sustainable. It's a conversation that requires empathy, respect, and a recognition of our shared future on this planet. It's time to shift towards solutions, because here's the truth. While the challenge is enormous, it's not insurmountable. There are actions we can take at individual, community, national, and global levels to address the population issue responsibly and humanely. One, investing in education, especially for girls and women. One of the most powerful tools we have to manage population growth sustainably is education, and it starts with empowering girls and women. Studies consistently show that when girls stay in school longer, they tend to marry later and have fewer children. Education equips young women with the knowledge, skills, and confidence to make informed reproductive choices. Access to education also opens doors to employment and economic independence, which correlates strongly with smaller family sizes. So, boosting education funding, improving school access, and creating safe environments for girls to learn must be a top priority. Expanding access to family planning and reproductive health. Closely linked to education is access to comprehensive reproductive health care. Providing affordable and accessible contraceptives, including condoms, birth control pills, IUDs, and an emergency contraception, gives people control over if and when they have children. Family planning services also include counselling and sexual health education that reduce unintended pregnancies. Empowering women and men with these resources respects their autonomy and can dramatically lower fertility rates without coercion. We have the tools. Now it's about making sure they reach every community, especially in underserved and rural areas. 3, promoting sustainable development and reducing poverty. Population issues don't exist in a vacuum. They're deeply intertwined with poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. When families struggle to survive, having more children is sometimes seen as economic security, a source of labor or support for parents in old age. By investing in economic development, social safety nets, healthcare, and infrastructure, governments can reduce the need for large families as a survival strategy. Sustainable development means not just growth, but equitable growth that lifts people out of poverty and improves quality of life. This creates conditions where families can freely choose smaller sizes because it's economically feasible. Urban planning and infrastructure investment. As we discussed earlier, urban sprawl and infrastructure strain worsen when population growth outpaces planning. Thoughtful urban design, investment in public transportation, green spaces, and affordable housing can ease the pressure on cities. Developing smart cities that prioritize sustainability reduces environmental impacts and improves living standards. Governments and planners must anticipate demographic trends to build resilient communities that can support growing populations without collapse. Changing social norms and cultural conversations. Population control isn't just about policy, it's about culture. Societies must engage in open, honest dialogues about family size, resource use, and sustainability without stigma or judgment. Campaigns that celebrate small families, delayed parenthood, and voluntary childlessness can shift cultural expectations. Media, education systems, and community leaders have important roles in reshaping norms. Changing minds may be as important as changing laws. 6, global cooperation and fair resource distribution. The population challenge is global, and so the response must be international. Wealthier nations can support developing countries with funding for education, healthcare, and sustainable development. Addressing climate change, food security, and water scarcity through international cooperation helps mitigate the environmental impacts of population growth. Fair trade, migration policies, and humanitarian aid can redistribute resources more justly. Embracing innovation and technology. Technology also offers hopeful avenues. Advances in renewable energy can reduce resource strain. Innovations in agriculture can increase food production sustainably. Digital technology enables better data collection and planning to anticipate demographic shifts. Final thoughts from Rana. So, what can be done? A lot, and it starts with education, empowerment, and compassion. Solutions must respect human rights and dignity while addressing practical realities. It's a complex puzzle, but with cooperation, innovation, and commitment, we can build a future where population and planet thrive together. So, do we have a population problem? Yes, but it's also a consumption problem, a justice problem, an equity problem. Solving it doesn't mean controlling people. It means empowering them. It doesn't mean shrinking humanity. It means growing smarter, fairer, and more sustainable. We're at 8 billion and counting. The question is, what kind of world do we want for 9 billion? Thanks for listening, Cluster Fudge. I'm Alexandra, and if this episode rattled your comfort zone, good. That's the point.